You could be creating right now. Yes, you. But for some reason, you're not creating. You're here watching this video. So let's talk about what gets in the way of creating and what gets in the way of our creative flow. I started painting seriously probably about 10 years ago, and I started with watercolor, and I was really bad at it. I didn't know anything about diluting my paint. I didn't know anything about not just slapping a bunch of watercolor down in one layer and trying to get it to look the way I want it to look in one stroke. I knew nothing about art, really, other than the crafts and the art I had taken in elementary school and high school, and I always loved it. I loved it and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't important. It wasn't important to be good at art. It was important to be smart. It was important to take things seriously. It was important to do things I was immediately good at. So if you're not creating right now, if you're in your own way, I want you to just get a pen and a piece of paper, and I want you to just doodle, scribble, make lines with no thought while I'm talking, if you can. And I want you to just do it knowing that there is absolutely no intention behind it other than getting you to get your hand moving on a piece of paper. For this painting, while I'm painting it, you're going to be just drawing and thinking about what I'm saying. And you're going to use my words as an anchor throughout this video to just draw, scribble, whatever it is. And if you want to go as far as grabbing a paintbrush and painting along with me, great. But ideally, access something that you have very little attachment to and you're not worried about messing up. Because believe it or not, this painting I had no plan for. Not that it's the most incredibly skilled and intricate watercolor of all time, but it's intuitive, which means it has no plan. I had no plan going into this what I was going to create. I just started making abstract shapes with water and filling it in with paint. I had to learn to slow down and I had to learn to trust my intuition in order to access the type of creative flow that I'm able to access now, which is not easily accessible to many people because we spend so much time trying to create from a place of perfection and trying to create from a place of skill rather than just a place of need, a literal need to create that exists within human beings. We have had to create since the beginning of time. I mean, if you think about how cavemen evolved, they would have had to have known how to create things, right? The wheel was created. It was an art. It was a sculpture. It was a sculpture or an art with a purpose. You don't have to have a purpose here, though. We're going back pre-evolution, essentially, and we are just creating for the sheer sake of creating. And then as we evolve in our art, we can create something with more intention. I was not able to create full collections of art until I was able to let myself let go within abstract fluid art. And that's where I went when I realized watercolor was not as easy as it looked online. It was not as easy as it looked in the videos. It was not as easy as just slapping down paint. So I had to find a method that allowed me to access a loosening up. And that's how I got into alcohol ink, and that's how I got into fluid pouring, because I was letting myself just literally pour color onto canvas and onto paper and watching it flow and utilizing tools to create movement and strokes abstractly that eventually led to these very strokes that you're watching me make right now. Now, I'm not perfect in this. I don't create every day, nor do I create even as consistently as I think someone probably maybe should if they're going to preach about the things that I'm preaching about here. But the important thing about my process is that it is extremely detached from my perfectionist at this point, and only when I'm truly struggling in other ways in my life, especially around like control or feeling like things are out of control, do I really struggle with painting from my intuition. I'm pretty familiar now with this process of painting from my intuition. And so even when you're not in the active phase of creating, you can always be technically creating with your mind and in your imagination by reading and learning and watching others create. And it can be amazing how much just watching and observing others and learning from others without actually painting or doing anything creative can then translate later into an enhanced creative process and a more confident creative process. Also, just being around shapes and colors and reminding myself when I was looking at a scene that someday it could be an element of a painting. Someday these lines that I'm looking at, even as I record this, the lines in the trees, can become shapes and intuitive marks that I make in a future painting. And so this piece specifically that I'm working on now, what I did before I started the piece was I read and looked through some large plates of Georgia O'Keeffe's work. And so I went through a book that had really large prints of her flowers and these large macro up close shots of flowers and flora and fauna. And I wanted to just kind of allow those shapes to imprint onto me as I was painting, and without using a reference here, because sometimes I might pull a reference, sometimes I might pull a photo, sometimes I might pull a picture online, sometimes I might look at a work of art or a sculpture or a scene outside my window. But for this piece, I looked at the book, I closed the book, I came over, and I just kind of went with it. And so there was no plan on there being this butterfly leaf shapy bug blooming feeling that's going to come from the final piece. It was really just designed to be shapes, and the shapes came to life. So if you're scribbling right now, if you're drawing right now, I want you to look down and see what it is that you're drawing. And if it's abstract, I want you to see if there's any way you can create something either surreal or a little more literal than the abstract lines you already have. And if you're already drawing something that is literal or surreal, see if you can make it a little more abstract or a little more surreal, and challenge yourself to go outside of your comfort zone. So if your comfort zone was to go abstract and scribble here, let's move towards surreal or realism. And if your comfort level was to go to realism, let's try to loosen up and go a bit more abstract and just see what that feels like. Even if you are like, it's not possible, I can't do that, no way, that's information. That's information. It's not bad. It doesn't mean that that's true that you can't. It just means it's information about where your nervous system and where your emotions and where your judgments and shame are in the process of creating, and they are in your way. But if you can't physically create, you can create in your mind. And if you say, I can't picture things in my mind, then look at a book and allow those pictures to imprint in your mind. There are always ways we can adapt and accommodate ourselves and allow ourselves to access things, even if the world has made it impossible for us to do so. So let's say you don't have money for art supplies, so you cannot paint. And then there is that pen and piece of paper next to you, but you tell yourself it's not good enough. That is hindering the part of you that is going to eventually have, hopefully, the resources to do the work, to do the watercolor you want to do with the fancier paints, with the fancier paper, with all of those things. But for now, if all you have is the pen and the piece of paper, we use the pen and the piece of paper and we create. We use what we have. So as I was working on this, I was judging myself the whole time. I did not like the way that the watercolor was blending. I wanted it to feel more smooth. I wanted it to blend more in a balanced way, I guess. I have not spent a ton of time learning about the technicalities of watercolor. I have spent a lot of time looking at other people's watercolor, but I actually haven't dove into the technicalities of watercolor. So what you're seeing in my watercolor work is me teaching myself. And I try a lot of the time to teach myself as much as I can about a medium before getting into a lot of the videos and the other people teaching me, because I find if I have someone else teach me too much of my core foundational skills, especially as an intuitive artist, I tend to take on their style more, and I want to be able to feel more confident in my own style and my own strokes and my own ideas. And so by breaking it down more on my own, getting the materials, testing them out, trying them out, then doing that first before letting someone else teach me, that's very helpful for me. And that's how I work with a lot of things, even in my therapy practice as a therapist. I like to learn as much as I can about the roots of a theory before learning about the theory or the tradition all in itself. Like, for instance, internal family systems therapy, I absolutely love it, but I don't believe that having the full certification is necessary to do great work, because sometimes when we get so rigid in one type of training and certification, it can limit us from accessing other ways of healing. And so I am the same way with art, where I try not to get too rigid in one medium or one style or one way of doing things. And by doing things and learning on my own, the foundations of it, I can access that more. So I created a custom palette for this piece. I created a custom paint palette using colors from my Grumbacher paints in tubes. And the way that I did that is that I utilized the colors from the tubes and then added a bit of color from the other colors in the palette to bring them all in harmony with one another. And I can do a video on color mixing a little bit later, but I am very, very, very new at color theory and color mixing, and I am very green, and I probably shouldn't really be teaching anybody about it, but I really was loving the colors that I had created for this piece, and I'm excited. I still haven't finished it even at the time of recording this. The piece is going to be one I'll probably be working on for at least the next couple of weeks, because I'm going in with a much more intricate background that I'm really excited about working on. But the fact that I'm even working on a piece like this, if you had shown me this 5 years ago even, I would have been like, no way I worked on that. No way I did that, because I was so unsure. And so also, I was so unsure of myself with watercolor, but I was also so sure that I was never going to be able to get watercolor down. And I was convinced that alcohol ink and fluid art pouring was going to kind of be my future. But the thing about the alcohol ink and the thing about the more pour style abstract is that it's not as easy as it looks. It isn't really about just pouring things on the page, and it is about being able to control the fluidity of the movement of the ink and the water and the alcohol and how everything combines. And that really helped me refine what I was doing with my watercolor, and that loosening up was the refining. It felt ridiculous to think that going more wishy-washy with the painting would actually lead to more precise work down the line. But through abstract art, I was able to learn how to hold my brush. I was able to learn my specific weight and push of the paintbrush, how I was moving. I learned my muscle memory. I learned how I work through abstract movement that let me just play, and through play. And most of my abstract work was play, and then people loved it, and that was just a benefit of it. And people don't have to love your work. For me, I had to learn that. I had to really unlearn that in order to paint, people had to love it. I had to be okay with people not buying my art. I had to be okay with people giving me negative feedback on my art. I had to be okay with constantly getting comments from people telling me, this isn't art, this isn't art, this isn't art. My preschooler could do this. And I'm still here. I'm still painting. I know that this watercolor, if you are a professional watercolor, you could probably look at it and pick out 1,000 errors in it, but I'm still going to charge what I believe my time and my energy and my passion is worth, because I am entitled like that. No, I'm just kidding. Because I have spent a lot of time really trying to put value into the process, and put value into my process, and put value into the meaning of the work and what it speaks to the soul, instead of how fancy we are with our materials and our techniques. And I know that's controversial, I know. There really is a massive benefit, though, to stretching your limbs with different mediums and trying out different things that might be outside of your comfort zone. And so if you are traditionally a watercolor painter, and I'm talking here about alcohol ink or fluid pouring, and you've never tried it, and it doesn't feel like it's your style, it feels like totally the opposite of what you'd want to do, I actually recommend trying it. I actually recommend seeing what these types of processes can teach you about your own process, especially with the watercolor. And seeing what, if maybe you're not a watercolor artist and maybe you're here because you're trying to learn watercolor, but when you utilize your tools, it's not looking the way that I have it here, or it's not looking the way other people have it. And that right there, you're identifying what is getting in your way. Comparison. It's not supposed to look like anybody else's. It's supposed to look like yours, and it's supposed to look like yours at this point in your journey. Because where you are now and what your art looks like now is how you compare your evolution, and how you see your evolution, and how you see yourself grow as an artist. If you never start by making ugly art, by making art that isn't beautiful or impressive or for, other people to consume, then how are you ever going to get to that point? And yes, there are people out there who are naturally talented, but even those people who are naturally talented have to work really hard to keep that talent. They have to work really hard to refine that talent. And, those anomalies out there that don't, then that's great for them. But most of us have to work really hard at our skill. And so wherever you are now is exactly where you are meant to be. I repeat, wherever you are now in your journey, in your creative journey, in your life, is where you're meant to be. Even if it sucks and it's awful with your creative journey. I can't speak to the privileged aspect of that if you're suffering in your own life. That's not where you're meant to be, of course. But in your creative journey, if you are blocked, then maybe you're meant to be blocked right now. Maybe it isn't accessible. Maybe it truly isn't accessible for you to create. And all you can do is sit here and watch this video. Then that is enough. That is more than enough. But for most of us, for those of us who have the resources right now, who have the time, who have the ability to put ourselves out there creatively, I want us to do it. So looking at your scribble right now or looking at your drawing right now and seeing if you can be done with it, seeing if you can finish up the last couple of movements here and reflect on what it is like to just create because someone told you to, with no plan, with no preconceived idea that you were going to do something on paper, and ask yourself what that process is like. What is it like to create with no intention or plan? Or maybe after this video is over, you do that. Maybe after this video is over, you grab a blank piece of paper and you just see what comes out without trying. And then you do it again. Maybe in a couple weeks, maybe the next time you watch one of my videos, you just let yourself build a intuitive journal, maybe, where you just have a journal where you are, every time you think about it, going into that intuitive journal with whatever tool you want to use, and you are just drawing and sketching something, just with a pen. This is just a pen journal. I have videos on intuitive journaling with watercolor. I have videos with intuitive journaling with mixed media and things like that. But this would be just for scribbles, just for limited material, intuitive drawings, sketches, scribbles. Sometimes with my clients in therapy, we'll do emotion journals that are just scribble journals where you just, when you're feeling a really deep, overwhelming emotion bubbling up, but you have to try to balance it and not allow it to bubble over the surface, I will say get a pen and a piece of paper and scribble the feeling, the emotion. Use your hands, use both hands if you can with tools in it, and just feel the emotions through the scribble. And people will have a journal where they do that. And sometimes the pages get ripped out because they're scribbling so hard. Sometimes there's holes in the journal from it, but they'll date each entry. And then throughout the year or the month or the week, they have this evidence of their physical energy and emotion. Sometimes I'll have them actually label the emotion next to the scribble. And it can be really informative to see how our emotions affect our hand, our movement, our creative process, our scribbles, without any intention of trying to create a work that means anything. Let go is the message. Let go. What would your creative process look like if you started to let go more? Would you have one in the first place? Would it be looser? Would you have more fun? Would you let yourself waste more materials because you realize that it's not actually wasting materials if you're utilizing them? Just think about it. So if you liked this video, please subscribe. Please let me know what things you want to talk about. I know that this is not a traditional YouTube channel. I am just talking over my process, talking about my process, talking about my internal dialogue and how I get through my creative process as a neurodiverse human and as someone who struggles with ADHD and other elements of myself that I might talk about more openly in future videos, but I'm not sure how openly I'm going to talk about it here. But if you have any questions, please leave them. Please chat with me. I am really enjoying making this content and am hoping to continue to build a community here on YouTube because it seems to have the most depth in terms of the community engagement. And I'm really loving the conversations I'm having and the people that I'm meeting and the things that I'm learning about you all. So thanks so much for joining me. Please just let go and see what happens. And tell me about what you create when you're able to let go. Tell me what it was like drawing and to listening to me speak. But be nice because I'm sensitive. Okay, bye.